The Men on the Sixth Floor. Chapter 19, The Guilty Men. In November of 2003, the History Channel ran a series of special programs during the 40th anniversary of the JFK assassination. The 11 hours of assassination program included 3 new segments of Nigel Turner's series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. The Smoking Guns was the first to air, taking to task the Secret Service and their possible complicity in the assassination. The medical evidence was discussed, followed by the story of mortician John Liggett, who was said to have had a part in reconstructing Kennedy's wounds. Next aired The Love Affair, in which a woman named Judith Baker claimed to have been Lee Harvey Oswald's mistress. Together they worked on an anti-Castro murder plot, along with David Ferrie and Guy Bannister. The claim was also made that Oswald was trying to stop the assassination plot against JFK. But the third segment, The Guilty Men, was no doubt the most provocative. Who were the guilty men? The identity of one of them was announced during the first 30 seconds of the program. Bar McClellan, author of Blood, Money, and Power, How LBJ Killed JFK, sat before the camera and stated with certain confidence,
I know as attorney for Lyndon Johnson that he murdered John Kennedy. He murdered John Kennedy to become president and to avoid prison, and there is no doubt in my mind.
Then followed the steady building of McClellan's case with interviews, photographs, first-person accounts, fingerprint identification, all pointing to LBJ as the mastermind in the Kennedy assassination. I, too, was interviewed by Turner, who incorporated much of our research of Malcolm Wallace and the murder of Doug Kinzer in the film. I contributed the newspaper clippings from my extensive research collection, and also told of the account that Kinzer's own daughter reported to me that LBJ closely monitored the 10-day trial of Wallace, sending runners from his hotel to the courthouse to keep him informed.
That murderous cycle began in 1951 in Austin, Texas, at this downtown golf course known as Butler's Pitch and Putt. The killer was a Johnson henchman called Malcolm Wallace.
Malcolm Wallace was born and raised in Texas. He was Texas-bred, Texas-educated, a very intelligent man. And when he graduated from the University of Texas, he was evidently recruited by Lyndon Johnson, and he was given a job at the Federal Department of Agriculture.
John Douglas Kinzer, the golf pro at Butler's Pitch and Putt, was having an affair with Wallace's wife and with Lyndon Johnson's sister.
Lyndon Johnson's sister, Josefa, was an alcoholic. She was a drug user. She was sexually promiscuous. She had loose lips. And who knows what she might tell Kinzer or others about Lyndon Johnson's political shenanigans.
Malcolm Wallace walked into the Pitch and Putt golf course in Austin, Texas, and shot to death in cold blood John Douglas Kinzer.
Kinzer died here for his indiscretions. Wallace was soon arrested and went on trial in Austin 3 months later.
First-degree murder, open and shut case. He gets a lawyer, known as a Lyndon Johnson lawyer. So Lyndon Johnson is going to do his best to get his friend out of hot water.
During that trial, Lyndon Johnson took a room at a local hotel, and the 10 days that trial was going, constantly sent runners from the hotel to the courthouse to bring him word of what was going on during the trial. So he followed the pulse of the trial very, very carefully.
Malcolm Wallace is found guilty of first-degree murder, but through influence of Lyndon Johnson, Malcolm Wallace receives a 5-year suspended sentence.
The Guilty Men segment captured America's attention like no previous JFK program ever had. DVD sales of the History Channel's presentation soared. Angry phone calls to the LBJ library by some viewers of The Guilty Men expressed outrage, and some even threatened to tear the library down. Lady Bird Johnson, who in 1984 refused to comment on Billy Saul's claims that her husband had ordered the death of Henry Marshall and others, joined several LBJ associates in writing to the History Channel. Jack Valenti, Bill Moyers, Jimmy Carter, and Gerald R. Ford all rallied to stop the further televising of what they called very bad journalism, the worst they had ever seen. They demanded that a rebuttal be presented to counter the error of the Guilty Men allegations. All DVD sales of the Guilty Men documentary and other 2 segments unrelated to the LBJ accusations were halted. Agreement was made to never air the programs again. Existing Guilty Men DVDs became collector's items, and many were bootlegged and sold online. At the present time, the documentaries are available on YouTube, but nowhere else. The response from the public was predictable. What was there to hide? Why the censorship? The LBJ camp had successfully strong-armed the History Channel into dropping one of their most successful programs, producing a rebuttal program and offering an apology to Lady Bird. Dateline, New York, April 2, 2004. In response to an uproar caused by a History Channel documentary that claimed President Lyndon Johnson was involved in the Kennedy assassination, the network will air a challenge to that program by a panel of 3 historians. The special, airing 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time Wednesday, is called The Guilty Men, an Historical Review. The 1-hour program is meant to rebut last November's broadcast of The Guilty Men, which was based in part on a book published by McClellan in 2003.
I'm Frank Sesno. Welcome to this special presentation of the History Channel. Last fall, to mark the 40th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, this network aired a series of independently produced programs that examined numerous conspiracy theories. They included the alleged involvement of Fidel Castro, the Mafia, and the CIA. One of the programs accused President Lyndon Johnson of being directly involved in the assassination. It was called The Guilty Men, and after it was televised, the History Channel came under criticism for the program's controversial allegations and one-sided presentation. In the interest of fairness and accuracy, the History Channel asked 3 historians to view the program and report on its credibility. They are totally independent from one another and from the History Channel, as am I. They are free to offer any opinions and observations they feel are warranted, and they're here to talk about their findings. Thomas Shagrew is bicentennial class of 1940 professor of history at the University of Pennsylvania, an expert on 20th century American political and social history. Stanley Cutler is professor of history and law at the University of Wisconsin. He's the author of more than 10 books, including The Wars of Watergate, Privilege and Creative Destruction, and The American Inquisition, winner of the American Bar Association's Silver Gavel Award. And Professor Robert Dallek has taught American history at Columbia University, UCLA, Oxford, and the University of Texas, and most recently at Boston University. He's the author of 8 books, including Hail to the Chief, The Making and Unmaking of American Presidents, Flawed Giant, Lyndon Johnson and His Times, 1961 to 1973, An Unfinished Life, John F. Kennedy, 1917 to 1963, and Lyndon B. Johnson, Portrait of a President.
On that, we all love a mystery. We love conspiracies more. The idea that one man could have pulled this off is almost incomprehensible to most people, or who knows what. So this idea that one person should have pulled this off is incomprehensible.
So
How's that?
Well, because the world is too chaotic. If just this one man, this inconsequential figure, this dysfunctional character, Oswald, how could he have killed Kennedy? Kennedy, President of the United States, surrounded by Secret Service. How could this guy have done it? So it leaves the world too shattered, too endangered, so to speak, to think that he was the sole killer.
3/4 of Americans do, still to this day, believe that more than one person was involved. Does that surprise you?
Well, no, it's not, because
I mean, that's more than conspiracy theories. That's the public saying, we don't believe the prevailing explanation.
but people are able to project these things. They have, as I say, a veritable industry going with all kinds of newsletters, websites, and so forth. And to people, the more distant that people are from the event, that is the younger people, are more inclined to believe this.
Leaders, they don't trust what the government says. They think behind every action of the government, there's some kind of, not every action obviously, but so many of the actions. They see conspiracies, they see skullduggery, they see manipulation. And Johnson is remembered not for civil rights, not for Medicare, not for federal aid to education, not for the Great Society or the war on poverty, but he seems to be remembered for the skullduggery, the manipulation, the behind-the-scenes operations. And so, you know, this attaches to the Kennedy assassination.
And don't forget that this is all followed by the era of Watergate.
Absolutely.
So, what I want to suggest to you is that when the Warren Commission report comes out in '65,
And you are here today to talk about this controversial film that aired on the History Channel called The Men Who Killed Kennedy. In that film, one of the lead characters, presented as an authority, a person by the name of Bar McClellan, looks into the camera and he says, "I know beyond a reasonable doubt that Johnson murdered Kennedy." Now, there was a thing called the Warren Commission, which at the time looked hard at this. Was LBJ's name mentioned or ducked? How did it handle any association?
No, they never looked at Lyndon Johnson because they knew that Johnson had nothing to do with
How did they know
Kennedy.
that?
Well, because they had plenty of evidence to demonstrate that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole killer.
probably not. But this notion of conspiracy, they did consider at one point. They raised, you know, some of these matters of foreign conspiracy, and they found nothing.
I would just add that the Warren Commission report, for all of its flaws, is still the best and most comprehensive study of the Kennedy assassination that we have, and will probably be the best we'll ever have.
Well,
It's just not. It's not enough to say it's not credible. There is no evidence. Bar McClellan cites as his witnesses and as those who know this. He was very careful. He is, in one respect, a very careful lawyer. He libels only the dead.
what do we know about Bar McClellan?
I just told you he's a convicted felon. Where is it? I mean, there are assertions throughout this film, but there is never a moment of corroboration except that this dead person said that and this dead person said that.
Tom talked about, as you watch this film, do you see substantiation for these allegations in the film itself?
No.
No.
Absolutely
No.
not.
No.
It's the assertion of authority. They have underneath many of the names, assassination expert. You know, why didn't they come to me, who spent 14 years studying the life of Lyndon Johnson, to at least interview me, to talk to me, like Gerald Posner, who's written, I think, the best book called Case Closed on the assassination, who asserts that these conspiracy theories are not convincing. Why don't they go to these people?
I want to talk. Billy Solestes is fascinating. I went back and pulled New York Times from March 24th, 1984. And there on page 9 of the New York Times was the following, datelined Houston. Billy Solestes, the convicted confidence man who built Texas farmers out of millions of dollars in the 1960s, has told a county grand jury that Lyndon B. Johnson ordered the murder of a federal official to keep him from disclosing Johnson's purported involvement in that fraud. So Billy Solestes, we hear from periodically through the years making allegations against Lyndon Johnson. Have any of them borne fruit?
No.
Have any of them, have all of them been examined and looked into carefully?
There's also allegations from a woman named Madeline Brown, who claims she was Johnson's mistress and that she had a child by Johnson. The child and Madeline Brown sued the Johnson estate to get money for the alleged son. She never won that case. As far as I know, there was no successful lawsuit here.
This 1983-84 New York Times report you mentioned, I think this is the one that the FBI did look into the matter.
Yes.
And it came up empty.
These conspiracy theories. Now, you know, there is no censorship in America. You can say anything you want, especially about history, and we'll continue to hear these theories.
Mass market. These things will always be among us. And occasionally we get an opportunity, such as this, to say, no, it's wrong, it's corrupt, it's dishonest, it's deceitful, and which this film is in its entirety.
Although the historians concluded that the documentary was entirely unfounded, and does not hold up to scrutiny, there was very little scrutiny to be found in this special review. No mention was made of the damning evidence in the murder of Doug Kinzer. Nothing concerning the Texas grand jury findings linking LBJ to the murder of Henry Marshall was ever even mentioned, let alone scrutinized. What are the 4 letters of communication between the Justice Department and Billy Saul Estes? These were all key elements of the Guilty Men documentary. Where was the scrutiny there? And where was their scrutiny of the fingerprint evidence as presented by Nathan Darby? What was the panel's explanation of why Polk Sheldon and John Cofer, both known as LBJ lawyers, represented Malcolm Wallace in his murder trial? What was their explanation of the threats to the jury during the 10-day trial? And why, according to the 3 historians, was Malcolm Wallace's sentence suspended, allowing him to walk away a free man and soon after secure employment in a company that was co-founded and run by D. Harold Byrd, a close friend and political supporter of LBJ, the owner of the Texas School Book Depository building? The historians ignored the above details, yet had the nerve to call the program an historical review. Immediately, the response posted on the History Channel's website reflected a broad-based disappointment in the program. One viewer wrote, "The American public has been denied the truth once again. The evidence is out there, and the guilty men only scratched the surface. Mac Wallace was a murderer, Estes and Baker were extortionists, and LBJ was their leader. Estes had provided documented proof that LBJ ordered the murder of Henry Marshall and others, and has provided a list of killings, which included JFK, LBJ was responsible for. The LBJ group doesn't want this coming to national attention, and once again the media submitted to being a part of the cover-up." Another viewer wrote, "Tonight's rebuttal panel program to the Guilty Men documentary was amateurish at best. Robert Dallek said there is no censorship in America. He said this on the very channel that censored the Guilty Men. Stanley Cutler said the Warren Commission was published in 1965. He said it twice. Shouldn't a historian know it was published in 1964? If the History Channel censors any program from further view, it should be this one." Oddly, Bar McClellan was never contacted, nor were any of the people involved in the film interviewed. Not one phone call to Nathan Darby, Nigel Turner, or myself. McClellan was quick to respond to the action of the History Channel in censoring the Guilty Men. He stated in a press conference, "That was a mistake. The public deserves to see the Guilty Men and judge for itself. Not only should the History Channel rebroadcast the Guilty Men, as it does so many other programs, but it should also allot time for a reply to the panel's evaluation to be presented. This historical dispute should be judged not by historians, but by the public after hearing historical evidence, just as a criminal trial is resolved not by the judges, but by a jury." And so this is where it ended. Since then, Gerald Ford, Lady Bird Johnson, and Jack Valenti have all passed away. Perhaps other attempts at presenting the view that a strong Texas connection exists in the assassination of JFK will be more successful. Until then, the men on the 6th floor and Blood, Money, and Power continue to fill the void.